Be advised that the views and opinions of the hosts and guests do not reflect those of the station.
That were inserted into soybeans, transferred into the DNA of the bacteria living inside us, and certain varieties of genetically modified corn are engineered to produce an insecticide. An insecticide living inside us, an insecticide.
I'm looking at the food that's in the grocery store. They say it's safe, everybody eat more. On second thought, I don't really know if it's made with those GMOs. So I'm looking for the non-GMO label. Before I bring it home, I'll put it on the table. I wanna know if it's verified, so I don't harm myself with genetically modified. They don't want you to know. Poison they grow. Profits they show. From those GMOs. Seeds that they sow. Gonna hurt us, we know. Told them to go. Say GMO, no. Hey, look. I don't want to eat poison. I don't want gene mutations at my dinner reservations. It's a food abomination. What they're doing to this fast food nation. They take artificial gene combinations, inject it in seed variations so they can grow their frankenfood imitations while the side effects cause medical patients. Keep the profits alive while they're spraying all the food with name brand herbicides. And all the while they're spreading their lies. Monsanto destroy a farmer's lives. And the FDA just keeps it all going, saying it's safe even though they all know it's just poison, stealing away your life. And that's what you eat, but genetically modified. They don't want you to know. Poison they grow. Profits they show. GMOs, no. Seeds that they sow. Gonna hurt us, we know. Told them to go. Say GMO, no.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Philippines Uncut. I'm your host, Buddy Kunana. Now, in this show, we talk about everything under the sun. And tonight, the debate and discussion on genetically modified organisms continues. Are GMOs safe for us? What are GMOs? These are some of the questions we're going to try to answer tonight. And joining us are two special guests. Starting with, on my right, there's Jeffery Smith, and he is the author of the best-selling book, Seeds of Deception. And joining him is, of course, our very good friend here on Philippines Uncut, Hans Palacios, who is a natural health advocate. Good evening, Jeffrey.
Good
evening, Hans, and welcome to Philippines Uncut.
Thank you.
Yes. Actually, many people know Hans because Hans has been on my show more than a few times, and we've talked about this advocacy. But I especially am honored and pleased that you're here because you're someone we've been waiting for a long time to shed light on this GMO controversy. Now, to start, Hans, perhaps let's introduce yourself for the people who are just watching you now.
Yeah, I've been a natural health advocate who's been talking about these subjects, GMOs, vaccines, Codex Alimentarius, and mostly here on GNN in various shows. And a couple of weeks ago, we found out Jeffrey was coming, so we certainly prepared for that. He flew in all the way back from South Africa for this. So yes. This is how important this event is for us.
That's true. I cut my trip short because we're really very concerned here in the Philippines about GMOs and the effect this will have on our economy, our lives, our health, etc., etc. Now, Jeffrey, how about you? Let's have an introduction. Tell us about yourself.
Well, I've been discussing genetically modified organisms for 17 years. Around the world, 37 countries, talking to government leaders, testifying, speaking to medical conferences, and discovering with the scientists and the medical doctors just how dangerous the genetically modified foods are and how the biotech industry has been covering up those dangers, even getting scientists fired and gagged and threatened if they discover GMO health problems. Mm-hmm. And so we are getting the information out to the public, and people are now choosing in much larger numbers healthier, non-genetically engineered foods.
Yes. Now, okay, you said that you've been doing this for 17 years.
Yes.
But what is your background? What is your training? Are you into the health?
I'm definitely into health personally,
okay.
But I have a master's in business administration, and I'm involved in education, communication, marketing. So when I heard a scientist back in 1996 who was a genetic engineer say that this technology is extremely dangerous. Taking genes from one species, like bacteria or viruses, and forcing them into the DNA of crops, that this practice itself, irrespective of what gene you put in, can create new allergens or toxins or new diseases and nutritional problems. And he said, we need to do something to stop this. And I realized he's a scientist, and he was communicating well as a scientist, but he needed some help.
Okay. And is this, I assume you're doing this thing full-time? This advocacy is a full-time advocacy. Are you part of any group or any larger network of organizations?
Well, I have the Institute for Responsible Technology at responsibletechnology.org, and we work with organizations around the world, including one in the Philippines, or several in the Philippines, that are putting me on tour this week.
Okay. How long are you in the Philippines for?
About a week.
And what has your trip been like? What has the response been to your, I assume you've been giving numerous talks all over the country, all over Metro Manila. What has the response been to your anti-GMO crusade?
Well, it's the same in the Philippines as everywhere. People generally don't know just how dangerous the foods are that they're eating. And when I explain, for example, how thousands of doctors in the United States are now prescribing non-GMO diets to their patients, and describing how the patients get better from skin problems, weight problems, headaches, allergies, asthma, infertility, diabetes, etc. And they believe that GMOs are a main contributor, not of course the sole contributor, but a main contributor to that. And I go into the details of how the genetic engineering works and what they're doing to the food, the increased toxins in the food. People get quite alert and they want to avoid GMOs. So the response in the Philippines is the same as I'm seeing around the world.
Yeah. Okay, let's dive right into it. Okay. For people watching us now, let's try to make it as simple as possible for them to understand. What are GMOs? Let's define. I mean, you mentioned something earlier about getting a bacteria and putting it, but let's bring it down to the layperson.
Okay.
How would you define it?
Let's say you want to turn a corn plant into a pesticide. They've done this.
Why would you want to?
Well, to kill, so that you don't have to spray the field.
All right.
The corn does the killing itself.
Okay.
So there's a natural pesticide in soil bacteria called Bacillus thuringiensis, BT for short.
All right.
So you can take the spores in the bacteria and put it in a spray can and spray plants. It'll kill certain insects by breaking open their stomach and killing them.
Yeah.
But what the scientists do is they take the gene that produces this BT toxin and they make millions of copies and put it into a gun.
Yeah.
Then they shoot that gun into a plate of millions of corn cells. Then they clone those cells into a plant, and now every corn plant has in every cell a little gene-sized spray bottle that produces this toxin that breaks little holes in the cell walls of insects to kill them.
Yeah.
Now, that process of insertion plus cloning on its own creates massive collateral damage in the corn.
Yeah.
So there's so many more proteins and stuff that's produced in it that weren't supposed to be there in corn, including a new allergen, all sorts of changes. But you also have this toxin, the BT toxin, which the companies say is safe because it only affects insects. But now recent peer-reviewed published research show that the same BT toxin, which pokes holes in insect cells, pokes holes in human cells. The same way, according to the researchers, as it does with insects.
Yeah.
And so we're eating something which could be poking holes in the cell walls.
For sure. I mean, insects are among the most resilient creatures on this planet. In fact, there was a simulation of a nuclear holocaust, and it was the insects that actually survived. So if something is toxic to insects, being a layperson, I would assume that this thing is not bad for human beings as well.
Well, it turns out that not only does it poke holes in human cells, it somehow gets through those cells into the blood, possibly through the holes that it creates.
Okay.
So 93% of the pregnant women tested in Canada had this BT toxin in their blood. And 2 weeks ago, a new study came out showing that this BT toxin damages red blood cells in mice. So it may be damaging the blood cells in our bodies, and then it gets into the unborn fetuses. 80% of the unborn fetuses had the BT toxin. They don't have a blood-brain barrier developed, so now they may have a hole-poking toxin in their brain. Now it gets worse, because the BT toxin is also known to cause allergic and immune responses in humans and animals.
As a reaction.
Yes. So we're eating corn chips
Yeah.
that have the BT toxin in it. We're eating corn grown in the Philippines that have Bt toxin in it. It might be creating allergic responses. It might be creating leaky gut. Now, doctors and scientists believe that holes in the gut allow undigested food particles to get into the bloodstream.
Yeah.
And that gets attacked by antibodies, causing food allergies, inflammation, autoimmune disease, some say autism, some say cancer, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's. And so this leaky gut is a very serious issue, and many doctors that I speak to about this Bt toxin say this might explain why there's so many gastrointestinal disorders on the rise in their practices since GMOs were introduced.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned as an example how, let's say, a GMO corn or a Bt corn is produced. Okay. Or you know, are other crops being modified as well genetically?
Right. So there's two crops that have Bt toxin built right in.
Yeah.
Okay. There's the corn.
Okay.
And there's 300 to 500,000 hectares grown in the Philippines. There's also cotton. Interestingly enough, I was in India, and there's cotton farmers all over India. When they pick the cotton that's Bt, they're getting itches, rashes on their bodies. And they're getting flu-like symptoms. And when they allow animals to graze on the cotton plants, many of them die. I visited one village, they lost all their buffalo after they allowed them to graze on the Bt cotton plants for a single day. But the same buffalo had been grazing on natural cotton for up to 8 years without a problem. So you have the corn and the cotton, and cotton, by the way, is used for cottonseed oil.
Yeah.
Then you have soy, corn, cotton, canola, sugar beets, and alfalfa, all engineered not to die when sprayed with herbicide. These are called herbicide-tolerant crops.
Okay.
80% of the GMOs are designed not to die when sprayed with herbicide, mostly Roundup. So they're Roundup-ready soybeans are sprayed with Roundup herbicide. And so you spray the Roundup, it gets absorbed into the plant, doesn't kill the plant. Some of it gets stored in the soybean, which we eat.
Yeah.
And so this is another way that genetically engineered foods increase our toxic load, because that Roundup, turns out, can cause birth defects. It's linked to endocrine disruption. It's linked to cancer. It can destroy the beneficial gut bacteria in our intestines, which is very important for immune system and for the digestive tract. And so eating this Roundup, if you look at what happens to the animals that are fed Roundup-ready crops, damage to the uterus, ovaries, testicles. When they fed Roundup-ready soy to female rats starting 2 weeks before they got pregnant, more than half of their babies died within 3 weeks, compared to a 10% death rate in the control group. When hamsters were fed Roundup-ready soy, by the third generation, most were sterile. They also some had hair growing in their mouths. They died at 4 or 5 times the rate. Mice fed Roundup-ready corn, had smaller babies and fewer babies. There's more and more research coming out on Roundup. I was just at MIT.
Yeah.
And I interviewed one of the senior researchers there, and she said, Roundup, if you look at the chemical properties, and I read her paper, if you look at the chemical properties of this Roundup, it can be linked to cancer, heart disease, diabetes, obesity, multiple sclerosis, anorexia nervosa, Parkinson's, aggression, depression, etc., Alzheimer's. And so this is something that we're eating in huge quantities. It's sprayed so much because of these Roundup-ready crops. Where I live in the Midwest, it's found in the air samples, in the rain samples, in the water samples. Last month they found it in the urine of people living throughout Europe because it's in the food supply.
Now this is really a scary picture you're painting for all of us. And you know, Hans and I have done several shows on the rising incidences of all these diseases that you just mentioned, cancer, you know, birth defects, autism, etc., etc. Hans, what do you have to say about this?
Yeah, because if you look at the timelines in the increase of these diseases like autism in the Philippines or even in the United States, it correlates also with the timeline of GMOs and the change in the vaccine protocols that have been initiated in the late 80s. So there's a correlation. It's just not one contributor. So and the people behind it who expose it are experiencing the same type of castigation. You have Arpad Pusztai, and then you've got Dr. Wakefield for autism in England. So it's a very, very controversial issue that they seem to be covering up. So we who try to expose this and make people aware are looking for the the verified information, the verified news, which is being covered up here.
Yeah. Now, Jeffrey, you mentioned things about rats and hamsters and cows, etc., and the effects on GMOs on them. Now, is there any research being done or has been done on the effects on humans? Let's say trials, clinical
Right.
research, blah, blah, blah.
No human clinical trials. The only human feeding study done for years was something that verified a very scary phenomenon, that genes inserted into genetically modified crops can transfer into the DNA of bacteria living inside our intestines
Okay.
and may continue to function. So this means long after we stop eating genetically modified foods, we may have these foreign proteins produced inside of us that may trigger allergic reactions or drill holes in our digestive tract.
Okay. Clearly, I mean, this is really a very scary scenario. My question is, how come there has been more research on this?
Right.
Let's say to prove that this is actually harmful to humans, because people watching are going to say, okay, so where's the proof? Where's the
Right.
proof that this is bad for us?
Well, first of all, we do have the testimonies of people now, hundreds of people describing improvements in their health when they take a GMO diet and they eliminate it to a non-GMO diet. We also have the experience of farmers and veterinarians that take livestock off of GM soy or corn to switch it to non-GM soy or corn, and diarrhea and ulcers and gut problems and infectious rates tend to improve dramatically. But when you look at the research, you're absolutely right that there's not enough research. And you can blame the Americans on this. You can blame the Americans on a lot of things. I'm from the United States. So,
Right.
and we take credit, not me personally, but I'm afraid that you can blame us for a lot. So the Food and Drug Administration in the United States, okay, the White House said, promote GMOs back in the early 90s. So they said, okay, we will create a new position for Michael Taylor, Monsanto's former attorney. Monsanto's the big GMO producer. We'll create a position for Michael Taylor. Michael Taylor, you be in charge of creating GMO policy for the United States. So the policy that he created said, we don't see much difference between GMOs and non-GMOs, no testing necessary, no labeling necessary. Then he went back to Monsanto, became their vice president and chief lobbyist, then he went back to the FDA and became the food safety czar in the United States.
Isn't that like a conflict of interest right there?
A bit. So then, years later, a lawsuit forced 44,000 secret internal memos out of the FDA files into the public domain. And you read memo after memo of FDA scientists saying GMOs are dangerous, GMOs could lead to allergies, toxins, new diseases. GMOs are different, lead to different risks. So the exact opposite of what the scientists said was listed as the basis for U.S. policy. GMOs are no different, according to the politicians. Amazing. GMOs are different and dangerous, according to the scientists.
Amazing.
And so, because they didn't require any safety studies, the rest of the world, even if the regulatory agencies do require safety studies, they allow the companies themselves to do their research, and we've caught them red-handed. We show clearly in my book, Genetic Roulette, for example, that time and time again they use the wrong detection methods, the wrong statistics, the wrong everything. They've got bad science down to a science. And they ignore the evidence of harm.
Yeah.
And when individual scientists, independent scientists, discover problems, they're fired, stripped of responsibilities, forced out, denied tenure, denied funding,
By who?
gagged.
By who?
Well, there's an incredible attack system. In fact, this was described even in the journal Nature, a very prominent journal that said whenever someone discovers or adverse findings, they're attacked even personally. So, for example, in September last year, Dr. Seralini from France and his team released a peer-reviewed published study showing that they took genetically engineered Roundup-ready corn and fed it to rats for 2 years. The rats had multiple massive tumors, huge tumors. They died at 2 or 3 times the rate. They had organ damage in the liver, kidneys, and pituitary. They were absolutely a mess. Okay, it should have ended the genetic engineering of corn, in my opinion. But instead, within 24 hours, the minions of the biotech industry from every continent were given talking points. They used the wrong rats. They used the wrong control group. The guy is an activist. He's an anti-GMO activist. He's not to be trusted. So the media got really nervous and either stopped reporting on it or wanted to give a balanced opinion by providing the other side. And the other side was so vocal, they said, well, now it's a consensus of scientific opinion. It was the same cabal that attacks everyone.
You mentioned a company earlier, a few minutes ago, Monsanto. Tell us about this company.
Monsanto told us that Agent Orange, PCBs, and DDT were safe. And they were caught red-handed lying. In fact, they were fined $700 million poisoning people near their factory. And some of their secret memos said, we can't afford to lose $1 of business, in response to the awareness that they were poisoning people. So this is a company that has decades of lying and has been voted the most hated company on earth for year after year.
It's a biotechnology company.
It's a biotechnology company.
And what's strange about this is that I understand the tentacles of this company are super pervasive. I mean, they're in multiple countries across many regions. And my question is, how come so few people have heard about Monsanto? It seems like, you know, it's such a huge company with its reach in almost every country you can think of. And yet, so few people heard about it. Personally, as a journalist, I only heard about this and after Hans brought it to me, and then I did my research. But why is it? How come that's like kind of like Big Brother in a way? No one,
they don't
it's there, but no one knows about them.
They have very few products with their name on it that go to the general public. They have seeds that go to farmers, and they have chemicals that go to farmers. But when there was a march against Monsanto, it was announced on Facebook a few months ago. We're going to have a march against Monsanto on May 25th. They expected a few thousand. They got over 2 million people marching in 52 countries, in 450 cities. Okay, they are, let me give you an idea of their arrogance, okay? In a San Francisco conference in 1999 in January, their consultant admitted how they had helped Monsanto. They said to the Monsanto executives, describe your ideal future. And the executives described a world in which 100% of all commercial seeds were genetically engineered and patented. And the consultant worked backwards from that goal to create the strategy and tactics to achieve it. So here's a company that wants to replace the billions of years of evolution, to eliminate the products and replace them with designer genes and designer organisms from an infant science that's known to cause side effects.
But pro-GMO people will say that, okay, we need this to produce better crops that are weather-resistant, pest-resistant, because we have 6 billion people to feed on this planet, et cetera, et cetera. What do you have to say about that?
The world's experts at feeding the world determined that the current generation of genetically modified foods actually work against it. The most comprehensive study, the ISTAD report, with more than 400 contributing scientists, signed on by 58 countries, completely eliminated GMOs from the possible solutions in their current state. GMOs, on average, reduce yield. They don't increase yield, whereas sustainable agriculture in developing countries increases yield by an average of 79%, and in the case of corn and potatoes, 100%. So this is a myth that has been generated and loudly by the biotech industry to get people to say, we need the technology. In fact, in interviewing someone that worked for Monsanto and did, quote, safety studies for Monsanto, and I drilled down and I drilled down and I drilled down, and we both agreed that definitely they were putting some people at risk with their products that might cause allergic reactions and death or other problems. I said, how can you justify it? He said, well, we need it to feed the world. So it's like this is their final argument when they can't justify putting people at risk and possibly killing them. They say we need to feed the world.
And that's something a lot of people are afraid of, because they've created this specter of that the world has to be sustainable. We have a runaway population,
Absolutely.
Things like that. Now, before we pause for a break, I understand I mentioned that you're the author of the best-selling book called Seeds of Deception. Maybe we can show this to the and show the other material you've brought to the studio. Okay.
So Seeds of Deception describes the takeover by Monsanto of the FDA. It describes how there was an epidemic in the United States from a genetically modified food supplement that was covered up by the FDA. It shows how one scientist who was actually hired to figure out how to test for the safety of GMOs for the European Union was fired and gagged and stripped of responsibilities because he found out that GMOs were dangerous. So this is the storybook about the dark underbelly of the biotech industry.
Right.
And this is the right brain book because it's stories.
Right.
And this is the left brain book. This is the book that we compiled all the different health dangers on GMOs, one after the other, in 2-page spreads, where the animals gotten sick and all the different theoretical risks. And this has been used all around the world by doctors and policymakers, etc. So this is the left brain book.
Okay, and then finally we have the video, which personally I like to watch. And
this is what I brought up a suitcase full of these to the Philippines because people like to watch stuff. Okay, so Genetic Roulette, the Gamble of Our Lives. It was Movie of the Year and Transformational Film of the Year last year by 2 awarding organizations. This one has people changing their diet within the hour and a half of its being viewed. We have doctors and scientists, parents of autistic kids. We have veterinarians and farmers telling the story. So the story in brief looks like this. The American Academy of Environmental Medicine reviewed the animal feeding studies on GMOs and said, clear evidence of dangers. Gastrointestinal problems, immune problems, reproductive problems, etc. Thousands of doctors started prescribing non-GMO diets. They report people getting better, gastrointestinal problems, immune system problems, reproductive problems, etc. Farmers and veterinarians take their livestock off of GMOs, reporting improvements, gastrointestinal, immune, reproductive. Now you look at what's happening in the American system in terms of healthcare. What's on the rise? Gastrointestinal, immune, reproductive, etc. The same repeating categories. You look at the qualities of genetically modified Roundup-ready crops and the Bt toxin-producing crops. If you look at the qualities, what would they produce?
Yes.
Gastrointestinal, immune, reproductive, etc.
Yeah.
So you have this nexus, and in the film, you actually hear from people who have patients or livestock or themselves changed because of changing their
Changing
diet.
diets.
Right.
Excellent, excellent. So guys, let's pause for a break, but when we return, we'll talk about how people can identify GMO foods and how to stay safe, how to stay healthy. So guys, stay tuned because Philippines Uncut will be back. Yes. Welcome back to Philippines Uncut. I'm Buddy Kunanan. Tonight's topic is the GMO controversy, or genetically modified organisms. And joining us still are Jeffery Smith, best-selling author of Seeds of Deception, and Hans Palacios, natural health advocate. Jeffrey, Hans, welcome back to Philippines Uncut, our second segment. Okay, in our first segment, we talked about GMOs, we defined it, we talked about how dangerous it is for people, we talked about your books, and we talked about Monsanto, etc., etc. Now let's bring it down to the level of the consumer watching us now. Where can people find GMO foods? Because I think we've scared enough people. I'm scared. Hell, I'm scared.
Yeah, I do that for a living. I'm sorry.
Where can people find GMO foods? Let's say, let's talk in general.
All right.
Yeah.
So people want to know what's a GMO and they want to know what's
Yes.
a non-GMO.
Yes.
Because they're actually not hunting out. I don't know anyone that wakes up in the morning wanting their daily dose of Bt toxin and Roundup. I don't think so. So you have, in the Philippines, 27% of the corn is genetically engineered. All right. So that means if you have a corn product that's made in the Philippines and it doesn't say organic, then you have to just consider it to be GMO. Now, I don't know if you have any corn on the cob that's genetically engineered, but this would be corn products like corn flour and tortillas, and a lot of animal products. Animal feed is made from this corn. Now, you also have soybeans that are imported into the Philippines and imported from the United States. And 93% of the soy in the United States is genetically engineered. So again, if it doesn't say non-GMO organic, you're out of luck. So anything that has a derivative of soy and corn in a packaged product. So the derivatives of corn include high fructose corn syrup, dextrose, maltodextrin, soy lecithin from the soy. So if you get a packaged food from the United States or Canada, then there's a very good chance, maybe 9 out of 10 of them, will have a derivative.
What do you mean by packaged food?
Packaged processed foods, boxes, like a candy bar or hot dogs, chips, things that have a lot of different ingredients in it.
Can of soup.
Can of soup,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Now, you also have the oils from cottonseed oil and canola oil. Okay? So you'll have corn oil, soybean oil, cottonseed oil, and canola oil, all genetically engineered.
Yeah.
So you got to get your coconut oil, of course, from the Philippines, or olive oil. Then you have alfalfa, which is used as hay for animals. And then you have sugar from sugar beets. Now, in the United States, most of the sugar comes from sugar beets, more than 50%. Now, you may have cane sugar here,
Yeah.
but if you get products that contain sugar from the U.S. and it doesn't say pure cane sugar, it's going to be from sugar beets
What about
as well.
meat, poultry, the kind of thing?
This is a real good question.
Yeah.
We haven't yet seen genetically engineered animals on the market, although the FDA wants to approve genetically modified salmon
Yeah.
that has genes from an eel and another salmon inserted so it grows quicker. We really don't want that to happen. But the animals eat GMOs.
What is the effect on them?
That's a great question. There's not been a single peer-reviewed published study, so you wonder why they allow this stuff out there. The Center for Veterinary Medicine of the Food and Drug Administration, they said GMOs fed to animals create unique risks for humans that eat the meat or the dairy products from those animals. Okay? They said it, they were ignored. And we have one study that's not yet published that shows some changes in the rats that ate the fish, that ate the GMOs, but we haven't seen the evidence yet published.
Yeah. Okay. So what you're saying is basically, if your advice, and I'm just putting this together from what you've put out there, is to avoid buying any food product from North America.
No, I wouldn't say. I live in North America. A man's got to eat. You got to eat something. So here's what I do in North America. Okay, we have a website called non-GMOshoppingguide.com.
Okay.
Okay, and an iPhone application called Shop No GMO. All right. So we have about 10,000 products listed in our shopping guide that are verified by a third party as non-GMO.
Brands, yeah, the specific
the actual
brands
products,
there.
Not only the brands, but the actual products.
All right. Okay.
We also have the 4 tips how to avoid GMOs. Buy organic, buy products that are labeled non-GMO, buy products that are listed in the shopping guide, or avoid the at-risk ingredients. And we have a list of those derivatives that may come from the soy and the corn.
Yeah.
And so if you're looking at a processed packaged food from North America and it contains pumpkin and something else that's not genetically engineered, you're okay. But if it contains one of these ingredients, you may want to go to the other aisle.
Okay, let's talk about labeling, because you said organic, non-GMO. Is labeling of GMO products, is this in wide practice in the United States?
It's in wide practice around the world. 64 countries either require labeling or ban GMOs outright, but not in the United States. Now, the United States, remember, the Food and Drug Administration years ago was instructed to promote the biotechnology industry. That was explicit, and it's still in place. And so they ignore the desire of 9 out of 10 Americans who want GMOs labeled in order to support the economic interests of 5 GMO companies. But that is starting to change. We have been educating people about the health dangers. More than 1 million people have consulted our shopping guide. Millions are trying to seek non-GMO products. Non-GMO labeled products in the United States were the fastest growing category of any health and wellness claim products in the country. And now, where there's so many people that want to avoid GMOs, it's now being reflected in the political sphere. So, Connecticut, the state, just passed a labeling bill last month. Maine just passed a labeling bill this month. The state of Washington is expected to pass a labeling bill. The federal government is expected to take it up soon.
Yeah, amazing that it just goes to show you the power of the pro-GMO lobby, that they can suppress this for so long when you said 9 out of 10 Americans actually want it.
Exactly.
And yet the government has postponed or tried to put on hold this labeling, this requirement to label GMO products.
So you got the power of the biotech industry, which can fire scientists and can do all sorts of changes even to peer-reviewed published studies, but you have the power of consumers who are on the top of the food chain. So in Europe, when this doctor who I described earlier, when the scientist was discovered that GMOs were dangerous and was fired from his job and gagged and threatened, when his gag order was lifted by the order of the UK Parliament, more than 700 articles were written about GMOs within a month in the UK. Within 10 weeks, there was so much consumer concern about GMOs back in 1999 that the food companies capitulated and said, okay, we give up. No more GMOs in Europe. That was Unilever, Nestle's, McDonald's, Burger King, everyone who still sells GMOs here in the Philippines and in the United States.
Wow.
Because we didn't raise a stink here.
Why are the Europeans so ahead of the Americans in this sense?
Because they know about it, because the media was reporting the health dangers. It all happened in 1998 and 1999. And so we know that when people learn about the dangers, they trust GMOs less. And so the mainstream media, with a lot of manipulation by the biotech industry in the United States, has been closed-lipped about the dangers of GMOs until very recently. But now the momentum is growing in the United States, and we hope so also in the Philippines.
Let's talk about the Philippine setting, because you mentioned these big multinationals. You mentioned Nestle, Unilever, etc., etc. Now in the Philippines, Hans, are you aware of what the situation is here with GMOs? With these multinationals are obviously involved in GMOs. Overseas, are they also involved here with GMOs?
Well, basically, a lot of them comes from the food that they bring in here.
Okay.
But the farming that goes on, and especially they're trying to bring in the golden rice variety here. It's already basically an introduction of the products and the science to the country. Now, the damage that it can do to the Philippines, especially on the environment, where you can't grow anything else. Remember, we're still an agricultural country. And if we're going to go the way of Argentina or India, where GMOs have made a big impact on the industry. Or in the United States, when countries like Korea recently and Turkey, Hungary have banned U.S. wheat and practically killed the wheat industry. Now that will open the door for them to send it here, because we practically won't stop it. It's cheap wheat coming in, people clamoring for rice and a way to solve hunger. That's always their cry. We're solving hunger, the scientific way, the biotech way. But people are not aware of the what you call this, of the dangers, simply because nobody covers it.
Yeah.
The Filipinos by nature are distracted 24/7 by game shows, telenovelas, and all that. They don't care.
No, but let's say, as a consumer, going into the supermarket now, should Filipinos be concerned when they look at their shelves? I mean, how prevalent are GMO products here in the Philippines?
They
at
can
the
be
moment?
concerned if they are aware. Nobody really covers it. However, there is no legislation that protects the consumers. None of our politicians are even looking at the issue. The Department of Health is not looking at the issue. Our main ERI is pro-GMO, I heard. So who's going to protect the consumer now?
No, but my question is, what products should they avoid? Should consumers avoid, let's say, in Philippine supermarkets? And I'm sure you've had a chance to see maybe
Well,
a couple of
anything that's
facilities.
imported from the United States, you got to read the ingredients. You got to read what's in there, which is what I do.
Because usually, when you talk about Philippine consumers, when they say, "Oh, this is made from the States," it's imported from the U.S. We as a people, sad to say, automatically put a seal of approval on it, and
10 years
confidence.
ago, all these products that are in the supermarket were basically reserved for the ones with money.
Yeah.
You wouldn't see commercials targeted at the masses. Now you're getting them. Kit Kat and all of that. They're all here right now. They have heavy advertising aimed at the whole spectrum of the market,
Yep.
and various chips and all that, especially corn chips. So now the whole spectrum of the population are into snack foods. It's a very big industry, and the ingredients are basically the same.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about,
Continue.
talk about rice, because I
Right.
know Filipinos love their rice.
For sure, it's staple.
Okay, it's a
Yeah.
staple. Now, to genetically engineer a staple is a huge risk. Okay, so in the Philippines, they want to genetically engineer golden rice with high levels of vitamin A. Now, let me tell you a story about South Africa. You just got back from South
Yep,
Africa,
yep.
okay? In the film Genetic Roulette, there's a story about South Africans, and their staple is corn. So there's a group of South African farmers on this farm, about 60 of them, and they were getting sick constantly. Very serious headaches, flu-like symptoms, inflammation. The guy had to keep 20% more workers on his farm than he needed, because some people were always down with sickness. He said about once or twice a month, one of his workers would die out of about 60 workers. Now, his animals were also sick. They weren't reproducing right, the milk content was low. So he asked the veterinarian from the United States, and the veterinarian said, "Stop feeding your animals GMOs." So we started planting non-GMO corn, and then fed it to the animals, and the animals got better, and so did the farm workers. You see, the farm workers were eating the corn grown on the farm.
Yes.
100% GM corn 3 times a day, plus their snacks. And when they started eating non-GM corn, they spontaneously got better. He ran out of the non-GM corn, had to buy the GM corn from the market. Everyone got sick again. The animals, the pigs, the cows, and the workers. And then he finally got non-GM corn permanently, and everyone is better. Now, this is a staple, okay? I was talking to a former Monsanto scientist, and he said that when his company fed rats genetically modified corn,
Yeah.
the rats had health problems, but instead of withdrawing the corn, they rewrote the study to hide the evidence. And he said to me, the percentage of the diet that was fed to the rats was probably 33%,
Yeah.
was far less than the corn that's eaten in South Africa. And those rats were only eating the corn for 90 days. South Africans eat them for a lifetime.
Yes,
So
yeah.
he said to me he was very concerned if the rats got sick in 90 days with a small portion of corn, what's to happen to the South Africans? And here's an example that we saw completely accidentally, spontaneously. The guy wanted to help his animals, and his workers got better.
Yeah. And then going back to golden rice, as you said, a staple is I mean, what is the situation with golden rice in the Philippines?
Well, they're field trialing it, meaning that it's not yet available to eat, but it's being planted outdoors, which means it can spread. I mean, they field trialed rice in the United States that they never commercialized. It contaminated U.S. rice. The rest of the world closed their doors to U.S. rice for a long time. It was $1 billion problem.
Yeah.
So just the actual field trial outdoors is crazy for economic and environmental reasons. And the rice itself is a terrible way to supplement vitamin A. You can supplement vitamin A by giving people the tools to create a garden for themselves. So you supplement vitamin A and iron and zinc. You can give a pill twice a year at a cost of about 11 pesos and prevent blindness from vitamin A deficiency. Instead, they spent $100 million into a technology which is prone to unpredicted side effects, and so they may try to solve one problem and create 10 others.
Why are they pushing this? I mean, it's the dollar sign at the end of the rainbow.
It is dollar sign and it is tremendous control. You see, you can control the patents to the seeds,
There you go.
and if you control the seeds, you control the food. If you control the food, you control the people, right? So imagine that there's a handful of companies that control the seed supply. And they're trying to introduce Terminator technology, which will allow plants to grow sterile offspring, which will force farmers not to save seeds like they've been doing,
But to buy
new
again.
seeds every year,
Yeah.
which limits the amount of genetics available into a very few, which puts the entire food supply at risk.
Yeah.
And they're doing all this for the sake of profit and control.
Yeah, now in the United States, there's already a big, as I said, outcry against this kind of thing. In the Philippines, golden rice, very, very frightening stuff, what you just said. Is there any group, I mean, what is the response to this? I mean, is there a backlash? Is there a group that's opposing this this golden rice thing? I mean, in Congress,
There's
are there champions?
Consumer Rights for Safe Food is one organization. There's Noted GMOs Coalition.
Yeah.
Third World Network's working on this. Others are working on this. There's a lot of groups now in the Philippines working on this, and I recommend to people in the audience to seek them out. Go on the website, look for the Facebook, look for the internet, look for the web pages, and get involved. You see, this is what can mobilize the political response.
Yeah,
in the United States, the biotech industry essentially owns Washington, D.C., but they don't own the consumers, and so we're moving the market. And now we're moving the state governments, and soon the federal government will follow. The entire European Union banned GMOs, not at the political level, but at the level of the food companies. Yes. And so we have a tremendous power as consumers. And so I would say this is the time now when they want to introduce golden rice, when they want to introduce genetically modified eggplant. Please don't do it. I mean, the eggplant can be so dangerous.
Are they doing that here in the Philippines? Are we plants? Yeah.
There's a TRO.
There's a court case
Okay.
that basically said, no, you can't introduce this eggplant. It's dangerous to health and the environment.
Jeez, yeah.
And so we won, the anti-GMO group won at the appeal level, but now it may go up to the Supreme Court.
Now, okay, with golden rice, how far along the process do you think this is? You said they're doing field trials, but how long would you, okay, let's say without opposition, how long would it take before field trial to actual, pushing this? 2 years. Then we could have a spread of golden rices, GM rice on the market.
Right, 2 years.
That's not a long time away, huh?
Jack, there's also a concern over the last couple of years that there's a problem with the bee population, and they're attributing it to Monsanto. I mean, even President Putin of Russia, just the last week, had made a big issue out of it, addressing this problem directly to President Obama. So, is there really a big correlation between the drop in population of bees, because they are the ones
that's scary
that cause
and Einstein said, right, when the bees go, then
humans are next.
Humans are next.
So there's been a huge colony collapse disorder where beekeepers lose 50% of their hives or more. Now they have tracked it to this nicotine-based insecticide, neonicotinoids, that can cause this type of reaction. It's been banned in Europe, and then we hope that it gets banned in the United States. But the seed treatments are much higher on the genetically modified seeds. They also feed the bees high fructose corn syrup over the winter. And we know that when certain studies were done and they allowed the bees to grab pollen from the corn that produces Bt toxin, that particular hive or hives ended up getting a viral infection where the controls didn't, so it might compromise the immune system. Also, the Roundup that gets sprayed on these Roundup-ready crops, according to some scientists, may be the missing component in this colony collapse disorder. So we have many possibilities why GMOs may be contributing to this worldwide bee decline, in addition to these nicotine-based insecticides.
Yeah, yeah. Going back to products, you said basically what you implied was, and you said it actually, if people see products from North America,
Right.
one should actually look at it closely.
Absolutely.
What about products from other countries? Let's say other major food producing Western countries. Let's say Europe, European countries, Australia, New Zealand.
I love going to Europe because I can eat there without having to read the labels. You see, in Europe, they have a very good labeling system, not for the milk and meat of animals, that's a problem, that's a loophole. But for other things, if it's an accidental contamination of over 0.9% per ingredient, it must be labeled. And so I can order things and eat it. And if I buy something in the United States that's imported from Europe, I don't have to read the ingredient label. So that's good. From Australia,
New Zealand, New Zealand.
they have GMOs in Australia. They have canola there. New Zealand's got, they don't grow any for commercial consumption, but they may have some in the animal feed. They don't allow the genetically engineered bovine growth hormone in either Australia or New Zealand or Europe.
Yeah.
Now, the bovine growth hormone, a genetically engineered drug injected into cows to increase milk supply, it creates more pus in the milk, more antibiotics, more bovine growth hormone, and more hormone that's a cancer promoter called IGF-1. A former Monsanto scientist told me that 3 of his colleagues had studied the milk from animals that were fed that were injected with genetically modified bovine growth hormone. They found so much cancer-promoting hormone in the milk, the 3 Monsanto scientists refused to drink milk thereafter unless it was organic. One actually bought his own cow.
Jeez. So what you're saying is that dairy products from those countries are probably safer than dairy products from the United States.
Right. So dairy products in the United States, we've ended up kicking out bovine growth hormone from most American dairies, and they usually will say right on the package, without RBGH or RBST or artificial hormones. It'll say that on the package.
Okay.
Because now that's what a lot of mothers are looking at because they realize the link to cancer.
Okay. Now, quickly, guys, clearly it's an uphill battle against the big company like Monsanto and all the tentacles it has in the political sphere. How do consumers battle against these big GMO companies?
Well, we've had tremendous success through consumer education. Knowledge has organizing power. Okay, so what we found is, another example, I was at MIT recently, and I said to the audience, okay, who in the audience has gotten rid of GMOs? A lot of people raised their hand. How many people noticed health effects? A woman's hand shot up and said, my 6.5-year-old was aggressive, out of control. They wanted to label him retarded and kick him out of school. I saw your movie, took him off of all GMOs. Within a week, his behavior changed. Within a month, I had a new son. And they don't have any problems now in school. So this is now spreading by the millions. People are telling their friends these type of stories. And this is creating an army. Okay, we have mothers marching on July 4th, which is Independence Day.
Today.
There's now
Yesterday, tomorrow in the States. Yeah.
100 different groups of moms in parades marching against genetically engineered foods.
Yes.
We have people now moving the market. We have major food companies saying no more GMOs. So the key for the first thing is to avoid GMOs, and the second is to get engaged in helping others learn the same, and in the Philippines to convince the policymakers to stop golden rice and the eggplant.
Excellent. Now, guys, we have about a minute before we have to end. Last words from Hans. Well, Hans first, and then Jeff.
I'm passing it on to Jeff. He's
Jeffrey,
here.
for our viewers.
Okay, so we're at a crossroads now. There's a lot of reasons to avoid GMOs for personal health, but here's a possible greater danger. There's no way to clean up the self-propagating genetic pollution from the gene pool. The genes already released into the environment can outlast the effects of global warming and nuclear waste. We can dramatically reduce the exposure, but with current technology, we cannot eliminate it. So this is a technology from an infant science that's known to cause side effects, that's being deployed into the entire food supply and into the environment, so it can affect everyone who eats, all living beings, and all future generations. We should have been so careful, extinguishing every doubt before we allowed these onto the market. The exact opposite happened. For political and economic reasons, the FDA and the US government ignored the science and ignored the scientists, and now we're stuck, so to speak, with this problem, but not really. We have the power to reverse it. In fact, I think we have a responsibility and an opportunity to protect not only ourselves, but our children and the next generation, all future generations are looking to us. We're at a critical time now. We're about to tip the scales in the United States. There's a lot of resistance to GMOs around the world. Over 2 million people just marched in May. This is the time for people to strike while the iron is hot, and the iron is hot in the Philippines. So this is a very important, this is why I'm here. This is a hotbed right now where it can go either way, and this is the time for people to get aware and active.
Now, for more information, maybe you can mention your website one last time.
Responsibletechnology.org. That's for the Institute for Responsible Technology. To help you avoid GMOs, non-GMOshoppingguide.com, or the iPhone application Shop No GMO.
Shop No GMO.
And you can watch the film online, Genetic Roulette, The Gamble of Our Lives, at geneticroulettemovie.com.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jeffrey, for all your work and for coming to the Philippines. And we look forward to covering this issue in the the weeks and months to come.
Salamat po kayo.
Thank you. And thanks also, Hans, for coming here. Thank you. And keep up the good work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, guys, I hope you learned a lot about GMOs and what to avoid when you're going to your supermarkets. Catch us again next week here in the show where we talk about what matters to you because you guys matter the most. See you next week. Is it okay if I...
Be advised that the views and opinions of the hosts and guests do not reflect those of the station.
That were inserted into soybeans, transferred into the DNA of the bacteria living inside us, and certain varieties of genetically modified corn are engineered to produce an insecticide. Living inside us, an insecticide.
I'm looking at the food that's in the grocery store. They say it's safe, everybody eat more. On second thought, I don't really know if it's made with those GMOs. So I'm looking for the non-GMO label. Before I bring it home, I'll put it on the table. I want to know if it's verified so I don't harm myself with genetically modified.
So this is how important this event is for us.
That's true. I cut my trip short because, we're really very concerned here in the Philippines about GMOs and the effect this will have on our economy, our lives, our health, etc., etc. Now, Jeffrey, how about you? Let's have an introduction. Tell us about yourself.
Well, I've been discussing genetically modified organisms for 17 years. Around the world, 37 countries, talking to government leaders, testifying, speaking to medical conferences, and discovering with the scientists and the medical doctors just how dangerous the genetically modified foods are, and how the biotech industry has been covering up those dangers, even getting scientists fired and gagged and threatened if they discover GMO health problems. And so we are getting the information out to the public, and people are now choosing in much larger numbers healthier, non-genetically engineered foods.
Yes. Now, okay, you said that you've been doing this for 17 years.
Yes.
But what is your background? What is your training? Are you into the health?
I'm definitely into health personally,
okay.
But I have a master's in business administration, and I'm involved in education, communication, marketing. So when I heard a scientist back in 1996 who was a genetic engineer,
I'm your host, Buddy Kunana. Now, in this show, we talk about everything under the sun, and tonight, the debate and discussion on genetically modified organisms continues. Are GMOs safe for us? What are GMOs? These are some of the questions we're going to try to answer tonight. And joining us are two special guests. starting with, on my right, there's Jeffery Smith, and he is the author of the best-selling book, Seeds of Deception. And joining him is, of course, our very good friend here on Philippines Uncut, Hans Palacios, who is a natural health advocate. Good evening, Jeffrey.
Good evening.
Hans, and welcome
Good
to
evening.
Philippines Uncut.
Thank you.
Yes. Actually, many people know Hans because Hans has been on my show more than a few times, and we've talked about this advocacy. But I especially am honored and pleased that you're here because you're someone we've been waiting for a long time to shed light on this GMO controversy. Now, to start, Hans, perhaps let's introduce yourself for the people who are just watching you now.
Yeah, I've been a natural health advocate who's been talking about these subjects, GMOs, vaccines, Codex Alimentarius, and mostly here on GNN in various shows. And a couple of weeks ago, we found out Jeffrey was coming, so we certainly prepared for that. He flew in all the way back from South Africa for this.
Say that this technology is extremely dangerous. Taking genes from one species, like bacteria or viruses, and forcing them into the DNA of crops, that this practice itself, irrespective of what gene you put in, can create new allergens or toxins or new diseases and nutritional problems. And he said, we need to do something to stop this. And I realized he's a scientist, and he was communicating well as a scientist, but he needed some help.
Okay. And is this, I assume you're doing this thing full-time? This advocacy is a full-time advocacy. Are you part of any group or any larger network of organizations?
Well, I have the Institute for Responsible Technology at responsibletechnology.org, and we work with organizations around the world, including one in the Philippines, or several in the Philippines, that are putting me on tour this week.
Okay. How long are you in the Philippines for?
About a week.
And what has your trip been like? What has the response been to your, I assume you've been giving numerous talks all over the country, all over Metro Manila. What has the response been to your anti-GMO crusade?
Well, it's the same in the Philippines as everywhere. When people generally don't know just how dangerous the foods are that they're eating. And when I explain, for example,
They don't want you to know. Poison they grow. Profits they show. From those GMOs. Seeds that they sow. Gonna hurt us, we know. Told them to go. Say GMO, no. Hey, look. I don't wanna eat poison. I don't want gene mutations at my dinner reservations. It's a food abomination. What they're doing to this fast food nation. They take artificial gene combinations, inject it in seed variations so they can grow their franken-food imitations while the side effects cause medical patients. Keep the profits alive while they're spraying on the food with name-brand herbicides. And all the while they're spreading their lies. Monsanto destroy a farmer's lives. And the FDA just keeps it all going, saying it's safe even though they all know it's just poison, stealing away your life. And that's what you eat, but genetically modified. They don't want you to know. Poison they grow. Profits they show. GMOs, no. Seeds that they sow. Gonna hurt us, we know. Told them to go. Say GMO, no.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Philippines Uncut.